Thank you, everybody. It's so good to be here. I'm super excited. Of course, let me share my screen so you can see what I'm seeing too. The most important part, right? And share. And
Looking good.
And there you go. Hi, everybody. I'm super excited that you are here with me today. Hopefully this talk will be entertaining and you're going to enjoy your time. And then we can get back to that social time together at the end of the day. Let me introduce myself. Hi, my name is Jessica, but you can call me Jess. I prefer Jess. Only my mom's call me Jessica when she's angry. I'm a senior developer advocate at authO by Okta. So authO is a product unit within Okta now. We are all one big family. And if you don't know us, that's fine. We are an identity platform, and we make it as easy as possible for any developer to protect their users' identity. Mind you that we are sponsoring Python WebConf. I'm so excited for this one. And we have a Slack channel on the Slack for the event. So if you want to talk more about identity, I'm looking forward to getting to know you and talk to you over there in the channel. I'm co-creator and co-host of the first and most beloved data science podcast back in Brazil, where I'm from. That's called Pizza de Dados. So if you know Portuguese and if you like data science or want to practice on Portuguese and learn more about data science, I do recommend you check it out. Actually, we started doing some interviews at Python events all over the world. So we have also a YouTube channel with a few interviews in English too. So maybe that's more your vibe, and I recommend that you look through it. My latest invention was GitFishes. GitFishes is a collection of Git study cards, and the idea would be to help anybody figure out those Git commands and remember what they mean and how to use them. Finally, I'm a Pi lady. My pronouns are she, her, and you can find me on most social networks under the handle Temporal, including in Slack. So enough about me. Let's go back to the content that we're going to see today. I'm super excited to talk to you about. And first things first, let's get a disclaimer out of the door. So I will simplify a few things throughout this talk in order to explain them in a way that makes sense. In particular, because identity is a complex topic. So every time we talk about identity, there could be layers and layers of complexity. I'm going to try to break them down for you today, and hopefully you get a more understanding about some of the concepts and terms we see in the identity world. So I want to talk to you and tell you a story of a friend of mine. So I'd like to introduce to you Sam. So Sam is a developer, a software engineer. She works with Python. She develops APIs and web applications. And she started a project recently, started working that project that has a challenge for Sam. And that project is challenging because Sam never did API protection before, and now she has to maintain that part of the application. And she's trying to figure out the process between protecting APIs and protecting web applications and make sure that she provides a safe code for her users. As we all know, once we start a new project, especially if the code base already exists, it is easy to get by copying and paste previous existing code and just adjusting it to make sure that it does what we want it to do and passes the tests. But Sam is not a person that stays happy by just copying and paste code around. She likes to understand how things work and why are we using a decorator on top of my endpoint or not using that same decorator. So Sam decided to take a few hours of her study time during the week to figure out all about protecting APIs. That's her challenge for the next coming months. And the way Sam likes to do this is trying to use the same technologies she sees at work. And she decided to start by developing an API, a very simple API, just for the purpose for studying protecting APIs. So she uses Flask, and she defines her first endpoint and uses that to run the application and make sure that everything is running as expected. Now, mind you, I hid some parts of Sam's code here, like the documentation for the endpoints and so on, just to make sure that the code is, you can see it fully inside of the slide and it is easier to read. But the first endpoint Sam usually started her projects, especially the ones when she was studying, is to define the home endpoint. She uses that to make sure that the application is running. She didn't forget to configure anything. And usually her home endpoint replies with a JSON message saying there is no place like home, pun intended. After doing those, she starts to run her Flask app, usually using the bug flag to make sure that the code reloads once she make adjustments. And then she can make her first request to that API, and she likes to use HTTPX for making those requests. She requests to make a request to the home endpoint, gets a response back, and she can always see the answer. There is no place like home over there on her terminal. Fine. After Sam got everything to work, she started, now I can dive into protecting an endpoint. And to protect an endpoint, she needs a new endpoint. She likes to keep the home endpoint always open, especially to make sure that she can check whether or not the application is running as expected. So after realizing that she needed a new endpoint, she decided to implement it and call it door. That is the reason why she got to the door as the answer for that endpoint. And the way she did was like this. Because at work, Sam uses auth0. You may have guessed that she uses auth0. She decided to use the same thing here so that she can use the same kind of code that she has at work, and hopeful that in hopes that this knowledge that she's going to acquire while studying is going to transfer to her workday. So she copies the code from auth0, and that's one decorator called requires auth. In this case, because Sam's protecting an API, the requires auth decorator is going to validate what we call JSON Web Tokens, or JWTs, or JOTs, whichever way you prefer to call it. So JSON Web Tokens in this case are going to be used to make sure that the person that's trying to access that endpoint has actually access to it. And she also is using Flask cores, which is another library, to make sure that the authorization header that she needs is inside of the request that is being made. After implementing the code for the endpoint, she likes to test things out. So the first request she makes is a simple GET request to the door endpoint and gets the first answer saying that something went wrong. So her first request is just a simple GET request, and the authorization header is missing. So she knows that she needs to figure out how to put in authorization header in her request. Well, actually, Sam already knows how to do this. Especially with HTTPX, it's super easy. I just have to pass the parameter with the dictionary for the header she wants to be in the request. But she needs to figure out is what do I need to put inside of that authorization header? It is a JSON Web Token, right? Because my decorator from auth0, the one that she's using there, the requires auth, needs to verify said JSON Web Token. But how does Sam get that? And that's the first pause that Sam does is an access token. Oh my God, her authorization header needs to have an access token as part of the value, so she can actually use that access token to perform the action of getting the response back from that endpoint. An access token usually is a JWT, it usually is a JSON Web Token, but it doesn't necessarily need to be. In the case of auth0, that's always true. We always use JWTs for access tokens. And if you want to learn more about JSON Web Tokens, I have links that I can share after the talk together with the slides. So now Sam knows that she needs an access token. She needs to go grab that access token from auth0. And that's when looking through the documentation, Sam figured out she's actually going to do the first flow of her application, of her API. That's the client credentials flow. So the way they works like this: in order to get an access token back from auth0 so that she can access her endpoint that is protected. Sam needs to tell auth0, hey, auth0, this is me, I need an access token. And that's what the client credentials flow is. Let's see one step at a time. So we have an entity, in this case it's Sam, but normally in a more real world scenario would be a script or another machine that will talk to auth0 by requesting the access token in providing the credentials to the OAuth/token endpoint. The credentials in this case are the information from the application that Sam already configured inside of the auth0 dashboard, like the client ID, the client secret, and maybe some other information that might be necessary. auth0 then takes those credentials and validates them to make sure that they are what is expected. And after the validation is successful, auth0 then returns an access token to the entity that required, like they requested it. Only then, Sam can finally make a call to her protected endpoint and perform that action, because then she has the access token and she can put the access token inside of the request header. And after that, the API will respond in kind, especially if the access token has the correct permissions in it. Normally, that in this case, that would mean seeing the message you got through the door. Now, Sam thought this was a bit complex, especially because it was the first time seeing this whole flow as a flowchart. But kindly enough, looking through the documentation, auth0 had information that she needed to understand. So this flow is actually comprised of two main steps. The first step is the authentication, where we need to check whether or not the person are who they say they are, person or entity. In this case, it's a person because it's Sam that is doing the whole leaving the credentials and getting back the access token. And the way that Sam committed that to memory was by using the example of going to the office and showing your badge at the door to the security guard. So the security guard will check your badge, see if your face matches the photo on the badge. And if it's so, it can give you access to your building. Now, the second part of the flow is what we call authorization. And authorization is the process of checking whether or not you have access to a resource or are allowed to perform a specific action. So going back to the example of going to the office, that would mean whether or not Sam could access a given floor or a given room. If I were thinking about the Okta office, usually we have the badge is scanned at the doors. And so if you have access to the room or the building itself, you have to scan your badge at the door, and then you know how to get in, if you can get in or not, because the door unlocks. Now, understanding that authorization and authentication happen as part of the flow, Sam then can get the information from auth0 to get the access token, make the request to auth0. At the auth0 dashboard, there is a way that you can do it, and they provide like examples with CURL, Python, Node, Ruby, whatever floats your boat. And then you can make the request and get the access token back. And after getting the access token back, you can then make your request to your endpoint, to the door endpoint, and see the message by passing along the token as part of the authorization header, and then everything magically works. Well, it's not magic, but it's as close to magic as we can get. Ooh, Sam felt really great about this one. She finally understood the difference between authentication and authorization. She finally understood how access tokens worked in this scenario, and she was feeling pretty good about it. So great, so that she decided that it was time to take this step forward. So Sam thought, what if I can turn my API into a web app, like a website? You know, you have like a page and you can click login and log out. What would that entail? What change do I need to make to the code so that I can have my full web app happening? And Sam very fearless developer that she is, decided to make that change and see what happens. So first things first, taking one step at a time again, Sam decided to change the door, the home endpoint. So instead of having a JSON object being returned as the answer for my requests, Sam said, okay, so now I want to have a web app, so I want to have pages rendered on a browser. So the way to do that was changing in between having the JSON before to rendering the template of the home page. If you use Flask before, you already know that Flask has a great way for defining templates and using a way for inputting information inside of those templates. I'm not going to go into details of that here, but if you need help with that, I can help you out. So Sam adjusted the home endpoint and opened her favorite browser and finally saw the first page of her endpoint. It was like, oh my God, hello there, it's working. Now, mind you, this is a simple HTML and Sam was not focusing on making it pretty, but making it functional. And she could take care of making it pretty later, as she only wants to focus on the identity and the development backend side of it. After that, it was time to update the door endpoint. And the door endpoint is also going to render a new template. It's going to render the door.html template. But this time, the door template is a little more interesting because it's going to take into account the information from the user that is logged in to actually display something. One thing that she needed to do that I'm not showing here is she also had to adjust the code from the require auth decorator, because instead of validating JSON Web Tokens now, that decorator is going to check for a session. And she tried to access the same page after doing the adjustment of the code, but got an unauthorized answer back, which kind of makes sense. Nobody had logged in now, so there is no way to get to that page. In a real world scenario, probably would see a more friendly page than this one. But for the purpose of study, Sam realized that this was fine enough. And once she got to the process of actually implementing the login and the logout, she would probably see the message that is going to be the same message as before that you got through the door. Now, you may have noticed here that Sam used a profile link inside of her home template, and that's because she didn't want to have the login button just at the home page. She wanted to have the login button inside of a profile page. And that profile page would show more information if a user was logged in. So then Sam implemented another endpoint. And notice that the profile endpoint is not protected as the door endpoint, but it handles a template that varies the information that is displayed depending on whether or not a user was authenticated. And finally, the same page, without the login process being executed, showed another message like, hello there, and the login button so that somebody could log in. And then I got to thinking, well, now it's time to implement the login, right? I need to get this figured out. So what is missing inside of my application now? Well, Sam got to thinking and reading through the code and the documentation from auth0, and to see how she could do the same thing. Get the information from auth0, get the simple codes, and so she could adjust and put inside of her application. And the first thing that auth0 teaches you how to do is that you're going to need to have a OAuth object that comes from the OAuth class, and we use AuthLib, one package in Python that is very commonly used for dealing with all OAuth things. And if you've never heard of OAuth, hang in there. I'm going to talk about it just in a little bit. And defining the secret key for her Flask app, because since it's a web app, you need to have a secret key too. And Sam likes to keep her code organized. So everything that is like secret keys and everything else, she keeps on a separate .config file. She uses config parser to read that file and have the information available. So after copying the first part, she needed to also read the information from auth0 from that same config file, like the domain, the client ID, and the client secret. And the last part, that's the most important one, it was registering the OAuth object. And that's because this class from the AuthO library is going to take care of most of the things that you need for handling the requests and redirects with all of the information like client ID, client secret, and so on, that the servers that we are using, that Sam was using, auth0 needs. It also has the information of where to get what is called the OpenID configuration. And we are going to get on why this is important in a little bit too. So after getting through the code, Sam said, okay, what is the other part that is missing? Because I already have the configuration for my OAuth class, and now I need to have actually the endpoints, right, for logging in and logging out. To Sam's surprise, auth0 also teaches how to do that. So she kind of copied the code and made sure that it was working. So she copied the code for the login endpoint, and notice here that the login, Sam doesn't need to create a template herself, which she thought was really good. If you have used Flask before, or even went through the Flask tutorial on the Flask official website, it has one of the parts that you go through is how to create users login and storing those informations in the database, right? So this time she doesn't need to create that page. She can just redirect her users to auth0, and auth0 will take care of that for her, which she thought was great, and now she understands. And after everything is done, the users will be redirected back to the callback. So that means that she also needs another endpoint, the callback endpoint. Now, mind you, that nothing changes on the previous templates. So the profile is still the same. It still has a login button. The only thing is you're not going to have like a page for putting in username and password as part of your code base. auth0 is going to serve that for you. And the second part was the callback, because auth0 needed somewhere to redirect the users so the users could go back to your web application. After configuring those, Sam then finally got to the last bit of code she needed to copy and paste and implement. It was the logout, because once you log in, you need to be able to log out too. And the logout endpoint will also have a redirect to go to the logout process from auth0. And also there's a really important step that is clearly in the session. So that way the session doesn't get stored on your browser and the user can log in and log out back again, and so on and so forth. Once the user is logged in, the profile page will then change and is going to show some information about the user. For example, I logged in to help Sam out, and so she could see the information over there. And it shows my name, and it shows the information that auth0 gives back as part of my user information on that page. Now you may be wondering, what do you mean for the page for like the user page? So it's a simple form that you can see. It is a page that is served by auth0. And I'm like, oh, this looks really nice. I don't even have to implement all of this HTML. Sam doesn't like to do HTML as much, so she prefers to do Python code. So she really appreciates not having to implement more HTML inside her project. So if you never use the application before, you can sign up, you can log in, you can use a social connection, like for example, here Sam had Google and so on. And now she has all of the code, then she can finally go through the process of logging in, seeing the login page, and instead of getting that unauthorized page at the door endpoint, she would get, you made it through the door, which was the message she was looking for all the time. And now, this may have sound like a lot, but that's because this is another type of flow. So this is a little bit, has more steps than the one before, and is what is known as authorization code flow. That's mainly used when we are developing web applications. And to make it easier for you, I also have the whole process over here. So this time, the person that initiates, or the entity that initiates the process, is the user. So the user is going to click login, button on your web app. After clicking logging in, the web app will then perform the action of talking to Auth0 and requesting the authorization code from the authorized endpoint. And that authorization code is really important because it means that the user wants the web app to have access to the user's information. So Auth0 sends the login prompt to the user, that little page that we saw that has the username and password or email or the connection with Google. The user can then authorize the application if it's the first time and put in the information if he's a returning user or not for the authentication, like username and password or logging in with Google. Auth0 then sends the authorization code back to the web app because the user said it's okay for this application to use my information. And the web app in turn does send the authorization code and the application credentials like client ID, client secret, domain, and so on to the OAuth token endpoint. Finally, we get back to that same steps that we already seen before in the other flow, the client credentials flow, where Auth0 validates the credentials for the application and gives back two things, an access token and an ID token. Now, mind you, that you may not know what an ID token is, but I'm going to tell you in a little bit. And the access token, the web app can then use to make requests to the backend of the application if the web app so requires. For example, I don't know, getting some information that is stored, let's say blog posts or drafts inside of the backend database and showing that back on the web application for the user if necessary. In this case, for Sam's purpose, she doesn't have a backend, but that could happen. So speaking of ID token, because I promised you that I was going to tell you what it is. So the ID token always is a JSON Web Token. And the cool thing about ID tokens is that they have information about the user. So for example, when I logged in into Sam application to help her out, it showed my name. And if we had the possibility, my profile photo would also show up there because Auth0 can send that back to the application, and the application doesn't need to make an extra request to the backend to get all of that information. So it's good for the developer because they already have the information at hand. It's good for the backend because the backend doesn't get crowded with another request to answer. Now, since we are talking about OAuth, it's important to notice that we are talking about OAuth too. And when we think about OAuth, we think about authorization, because OAuth is an authorization protocol. It has a collection of standards and flows that you can talk about and you can implement on your applications. OAuth is really cool because somebody that really understands about authorization already created what a flow should look like for us. It's just a matter of using it if you're using a provider for doing so or implementing it. I do not recommend that you implement it yourself, but it is there and you can study it. And understanding it, you can implement better applications. After that, we have the OpenID Connect. So OpenID Connect is an identity layer built on top of OAuth. So the idea of authentication comes to mind, because we want to say if people are who they say they are, or the entity that is accessing our services are who they say they are. So OpenID Connect was built on top of OAuth and has that identity layer. The way that Sam got understood this was ID is identity. We want to make sure of the identity of the people accessing our service. So we have authentication. Finally, I think it is important to tell you that Sam was really happy about understanding what authorization and authentication were, how they come into play within these two flows, and what that meant for her project and also for her work. She also was feeling really good about the idea that we have different flows for different types of applications, and choosing the correct flow for your application would be really important to avoid having problems in the future. and also keeping our users' data safe. Whenever we think about OAuth, we are always thinking about OAuth 2. OAuth 1 had a few flaws, and so OAuth 2 came to life. And it always thinks about, when we're thinking about OAuth, we think about authorization. Finally, she was really glad to understand OpenID Connect, or OIDC, if you prefer to use little letters instead of the names. And that OIDC was the identity layer on top of OAuth. But the coolest part is SAM doesn't actually exist. This was one journey that I went through when I first started studying identity and working at auth0. Before I used to be a data scientist. So I've been through this whole process of building it myself to see what parts were involved into creating an API that is protected and creating a web app that is protected and making sure that my users can log in, log out, and see only the information that is available to them. So if you are going through this process right now too, I recommend that you take your time studying all of these concepts and try to think of what would that look like in a real world. For example, if I go into my office building, is that authorization, is that authentication, and so on, because it is easier to remember. Now, since we talk about flows, and this is a talk about flows, it's worth to mention that we only saw client credentials flows, where you can exchange the client credentials and get back access tokens usually used for protecting APIs. And we saw the authorization code flow, which is regularly used on web applications, for example. But there are a few others. For example, the PKCE flow, and it's called PKCE. I don't know why, don't ask me that question, but it's actually spelled PKCE. It's always really interesting to me to realize that. And the PKCE flow is an extension of the authorization code flow, but it has an extra layer of security because PKCE actually stands for proof key for code exchange. So it prevents some other vulnerabilities that you might face while implementing the authorization code flow on your applications. So if you are doing authorization code flow, it may be worth to go directly into the PKCE code, the PKCE flow. There is also resource on the password flow and a few others. This is just to name a few. And I could spend like the whole day, 4 days, talking about different types of flows. But well, our time here is limited today. And if you want to talk more about other types of authorization flows, I would be glad to talk to you over in Slack. Finally, main takeaways so you can take with you home is that choosing the correct flow for your application will be extremely important for protecting your applications, your users' identities, your users' data, and will help you avoid a number of mistakes. I see time and time again, us Pythonistas, we basically develop most of APIs, try to implement client credentials flows when we need authorization code flow instead. And so it is important for you to choose the correct flow of your application. Also, authentication always comes before authorization. We need to make sure that the people are who they say they are before saying whether or not they can access something or if they can perform a given action. Finally, when you think about OpenID Connect or OIDC, think of authentication. And when you think about OAuth, think of authorization. And if you're starting this journey with identity and all of these amazing concepts, be patient with yourself. This is on a personal note from me to you. It takes some time for things to actually sink in, and there is a lot of things to learn on the identity spectrum. So be patient. That was it for today. I hope that you enjoyed your time learning about this whole journey of implement different types of authorization flows. Once again, my handle on most social networks is just Temporal, and I'm looking forward to catching up with you at this sponsor channel on Slack for the event. Thank you.